hello. Welcome to another episode of the Ranger Gareth podcast. I am joined here by Dale Guino, the Executive Director of WildNorth, animal handler, and the only guest with an IMDb page. That was harder than I thought it would be. So hi, Dale. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Gareth, my pleasure.
I've known you for a few years now, probably 4 or 5 years since I've been with the city. You have been based out of the current location for... I guess we could start with that. WildNorth has had a few locations in and around Edmonton. Originally, there was the location down south of Ellerslie, which used to be owned by the U of A. By the time you joined on with WildNorth, they had already moved to their location at 127th and Yellowhead, right?
Correct, yeah. It used to be the old city pound.
The old city pound.
Now the city has allocated that space for us, generously.
How do those kind of arrangements work? Is it a long lease at some kind of preferential rate, or how do they actually work that out?
Yeah, the city has been really good to us. So WildNorth is considered an essential service for the city of Edmonton, and they do contribute financially to us to sort of to do all the things that WildNorth does. And I know we're going to get into that in a bit.
Yeah.
But as part of that sort of agreement and package, they also give us a space, and that is our wildlife hospital and triage in Edmonton, and then we have another facility which is our rehabilitation center out in Parkland County.
Yeah, I guess we could jump right into that. What does WildNorth do? How long has WildNorth been doing it? And why do you love your job so much?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked a bit about us moving around. So originally, WildNorth, under a different name, we'll talk a bit about the name change, was founded by a wonderful lady named Kim Blom. And Kim actually was working at a local veterinary clinic many, many years ago. And in 1989, she figured that she had to start something more official because they were taking in all these injured and orphan animals and kind of ad hoc, kind of doing their best with them. But she actually started working out of her home. And that was the first location. And back then, she would have had a few dozen animals probably the first year.
Oh, my God.
Now we're up to 3,500 animals, the largest rehabilitation organization in Alberta. That sort of brought us along in several different renditions as we moved and as we've grown. And now in our new location now for, I guess, better part of a decade.
So... did Kim ever run into any issues with Fish and Wildlife, having that many animals just living in and around her home?
It was a different world back then, Gareth. You were talking, more than 30 years ago, right? And so there really wasn't a lot of legislation surrounding doing wildlife rehabilitation. And a lot of people were sort of winging it. They're kind-hearted people doing their best to help wildlife.
Yeah.
And it was around that time that the rehabilitation community sort of was formed in Alberta. And there's now 7 of us across the province. We're the largest and most northerly, the only full-scope center north of Red Deer. Mm-hmm. But most of the major ones started within a few years of that time, back in 1989. And so it sort of developed alongside the Fish and Wildlife and the legislation. And so that now we have, sort of really good policies and protocols and licensing and kind of all around that so that things are done properly these days.
So I guess that's good because that would mean that your organization and other organizations like it had a seat at the table when they were crafting this new legislation, correct?
Yeah, as much as we can. There was a sort of an advisory group. The rehabilitation community sort of formed a round table and got together and did their best in an advisory capacity to help formulate all those rules surrounding rehabilitation. But at the end of the day, it's a sort of the government's place to decide how we're to operate, and so we actually still operate under licensing through the Alberta Environment and Parks and also the Canadian Wildlife Service. So those are the 2 major licenses and sort of the people that oversee what it is that we do.
And with those licenses, I believe there are certain rules as to what you can and cannot rehabilitate, correct? There are certain species that you legally cannot handle?
Yeah, so if we went, again, back in the day when there was few rules and regulations and things were getting started, you were allowed to rehabilitate any wild creature in the province of Alberta. Mm-hmm. Going back probably close to 20 years ago now, there was a decision made on behalf of the provincial government to to limit the rehabilitation of some of the larger, more dangerous animals. So we're talking about adult ungulates, things like moose and deer, and some of the larger members of the carnivore family. So, no grizzly bears or black bears or wolves or mountain lions, these kinds of things. And I think the decision was made based on their concern that if these animals were not rehabilitated properly, if they were over-habituated, that they might pose a risk to the public if they were released. In other words, that hand-raised bear released back into the wild is going to walk up to the first person it sees. Yeah. And, the government is not really, they don't really like to take on a lot of liability, and so for them...
I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah, and so, back, there was no record of that. There was no instance in Alberta where that had ever happened. It was sort of an arbitrary decision made, and some of that's starting to get dialed back. So a few years ago, bear cubs were permitted now for rehabilitation in the province. We're allowed to do those, and we're back at the table talking about some of those other prohibited species under strict controls and policies, and they're working with us to develop, so it's not sort of carte blanche, but we have to have certain facilities and expertise, when you're dealing with those larger, more dangerous creatures.
Just following up from my conversation with Colleen earlier, what about coyotes? Are they still prohibited?
Yeah, coyotes, that's a bit of the bane of our existence here in Edmonton because, we respond to about 200 coyote calls a year. So our wildlife hotline, it takes in almost 14,000 phone calls now a year.
Oh my goodness.
About 200 of those are directly related to injured or orphaned coyotes. They are sort of arguably the least dangerous of the animals on that prohibited list. Yeah. And the one we are most anxious to take off that list and start to do work with because, not only are there a lot of coyotes that need help, but a lot of concerned public here. And sort of our ideas about coyotes are changing, right? So with our rural roots here in Alberta, like if you're in Edmonton and you've been here, multiple generations, chances are you had a relative way back when that had a farm and coyotes were of a concern. And so some of that sort of attitude towards them as vermin or as creatures that they get much maligned has sort of carried through in subsequent generations. So we're kind of working on that. Things are changing. Yeah. And now in a large urbanscape, people are beginning to appreciate the wildlife around them. And so it's become less political. And so we think we can get some movement there and hopefully start rehabilitating coyotes soon.
I like the optimism because, at my previous job, it was, there was the crowd that wanted no one to ever touch any coyotes ever and leave them alone because they were divine beings. There was the other end where they were saying, cull every animal you see, and then there's a sensible middle. And right. I feel like the sensible middle is getting a bit more vocal, which is good because we need people like that who are like, hey, not every coyote is out to kill you. We were looking it up earlier. In human history, guess how many, or you probably know this, guess how many coyote fatalities there have been in human history?
Oh, I don't know human history, but it's got to be minuscule. I mean, two, right?
Two.
And even attacks on humans is very, very rare, right? I mean, so... Yeah, that really doesn't surprise me. And the fact of the matter is here in Edmonton, we have one of, if not the largest greenbelt of any North American city here with the River Valley. It's like 20 times the size of Central Park or something. It's just a huge space. Mm-hmm. And like it or not, we're going to have to learn how to cohabitate and live in harmony with wild creatures. They're here. They're not going anywhere. So big part of WildNorth's focus is education and teaching people about how to live in harmony with those creatures. And we actually save more animals, without a doubt, by far, by educating people than the actual physical rehabilitative work that we do.
Actually, that seems to be a good time to segue into why was there the name change?
So previous to WildNorth, we were known as the Wildlife Rehabilitation Society of Edmonton. Mm-hmm. Now, you can well imagine every time we answered the phone, I would say, hi, you've reached Dale Guino, Executive Director of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Society of Edmonton. People weren't going to remember that. That's a huge mouthful to remember. Yeah. So we changed the name for two reasons. One, so that there was a little more, recognition. You're going to remember WildNorth. It's very simple. It's easy to remember. Yeah. But moreover, our scope has really increased. Originally we were dealing with animals that were just in Edmonton, hence the name Wildlife Rehabilitation Society of Edmonton. Yeah. Now, as far as as the most northern facility, we're dealing with animals right up to the northern end of the province. So we have satellite rescue groups up in those areas and transport volunteers that transfer animals down. So we represent the whole northern part of Alberta. So we thought WildNorth was an apt name.
Do you do a lot of work closely with some of the other big wildlife rehabilitation centers in Alberta?
We work very closely. And, it's funny because of the 7 that are licensed, and keep in mind, that's a relatively small number of rehabilitation centers. If we were to compare that to, say, the province of Ontario, where they have more than 70, we have 7. And of the 7 here, 2 specialize in birds of prey, and the other 5 are sort of generalists. But among those rehabilitation organizations, we all have really sort of specialties and expertise, things we're really good at. Yeah. And so we work together to serve the wildlife and get them the best help they need. So, for example, if we have deer brought into our facility, we generally send them down to our colleagues down at Medicine River, who have a much better deer facility than we do, and they can cohabitate that, and deer do better when they're together. So we would lean on their deer expertise. So we kind of work together to make sure that the public and animals are best served.
I was going to ask you that because my wife and I have been to 2 other wildlife rehab centers over the years because we keep finding animals that have recently been hit by vehicles. So one time we had I believe it was a cedar or Bohemian waxwing. I can't remember. It was one of the waxwings. And we ended up bringing it to Medicine River, even though it was like way out of the way. We tried taking it to Ellis Bird Farm, and then they panicked and said, we're not a rehabilitation center. We can't touch it. So then we had to drive like an extra, hour and a half or 2 hours to Medicine River. And realistically, the bird probably died because it was like coughing blood, which is not a good sign. But
and that's the idea. We're not under any illusion that saving one cedar waxwing is going to make a serious impact on cedar waxwing populations, or from a conservation standpoint. But a good part of wildlife rehabilitation is it's doing the right thing. Having compassion towards other living things is a really important part of the human condition. And so dealing with families and kids and if you go with your family and your children, and you're delivering injured or orphaned wildlife to a place where they can get looked after, is part of humanity. It's a really good thing to do, and I think an important part of being a good human.
I like that perspective, because when I drove past the waxwing on the highway, my first thought was, should I turn around? And like maybe a couple seconds later, I was like, oh, come on. And I had to turn around. I couldn't leave it.
Well, it's funny, because we also recognize that injured wildlife become an important part of the food chain, right? Like when something is injured, a predator is going to take advantage of that, and maybe they have their own young to feed and things like that. It's a very important part. But there comes a time when you see an animal that's in a circumstance where there's going to be undue suffering. Like if we're, for example, in the downtown core here in Edmonton, and there's an injured goose, well, it's not likely to get picked off by a predator in the downtown core. So we're going to sit there and, as a society, and watch this goose, die a long, arduous death over 3 weeks. Where we can bring it in, hopefully fix it, and if we can't, well, at least we could offer it humane euthanasia, which is a better alternative to starving or freezing to death.
I know in Hermitage Park in North Edmonton, we had an issue where there was like a very publicized case of this goose that had fishing line with weights wrapped around its one leg. And let me be the time to say to anyone that's listening, please, when you're done with your fishing line, cut it up. Yeah. Just cut it up. That little thing can save so many animals.
In that park, that's a big issue. We get a lot of fishing line wrapped birds there.
Yeah, because there's the stocked pond there. So people that are like just learning how to fish, like I encourage everyone to learn how to fish. It's fun. It's great. I love it. But when you're learning, I hope whoever's teaching you is also teaching you the responsibility side. Like, for example, I've started to switch to more tungsten weights now, because I've lost a fair amount of lead weights over the years in the water, and I started to feel guilty about it because that's water that everyone drinks and the animals have to live in. And I know the effects of lead poisoning, so I've started switching to tungsten weights, even though they are way more expensive.
Sure.
Like 3 or 4 times more expensive. But again, there's just like that nagging feeling in the back of my head. Like, I know what the right thing is. And even though it costs a bit of extra money, I feel compelled to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I think people just need to be conscious. And it's a bit about education. Like, you talk about how lead can adversely affect animals. That goes right through the food chain. We get a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 bald eagles a year with lead poisoning. And they're lead poisoned because guess what? They've eaten waterfowl that have been poisoned, or fish that have been poisoned from those things. So it goes up even beyond that sort of first level, right? And it can affect other animals in the food chain. So, your actions can affect wildlife adversely. About 95% of the creatures that we get into our rehabilitation center. Remember, 3,500 a year. 95% of them are there because of something people have done. If you're a hunter, make sure that you know that you're going to have a reasonable chance of actually killing the animal, and humanely. And don't take that shot if you don't think, and you're going to end up wounding an animal who, is going to be in trouble. If you're a fisherman, really pay attention to that line and make sure that you do your very best to recover it, because it can adversely affect things. So it's just being a responsible citizen, really.
Do you watch Northwood's Law?
No.
It's this show that my wife and I watch every time we're at the hotels, because we don't have cable, but the hotels, they always have these marathons of like Lone Star Law and Northwood's Law. But Northwood's Law, it's all about conservation officers or game wardens in the northeastern United States. And the reason I bring it up is because they actually had an episode where a loon was acting very strange, and when they ended up taking it in for an x-ray, its stomach was full of lead weights,
right,
and it was dying of lead poisoning. I believe they managed to save it. I forget exactly how you reverse lead poisoning, but they managed to save this one. But it's just, as someone who isn't a fan of like big government overreach, I would like if people organically move towards tungsten. But at the same time, I could see the lead weights eventually being banned.
Right. What they've done in shot with shotguns, right? And
it's all steel shot now.
Steel shot now, same thing. So, and you know what? Again, a lot of people just don't consider that, I think, and so that education piece is really important, right?
And the national parks, they've banned all lead weights already. If you're fishing, it's no baits, no scented baits, and no lead weights. So it's all tungsten and flashy things and flies, but nothing that could harm or contaminate the environment.
Yep, and we get quite a number of lead poison creatures, all kinds of waterfowl, and again, right up to the predators that take them every year.
All right, so you would know then. How do you deal with an animal that has lead poisoning? What do you do? So first we have to determine if it does. So we do actually, at our wildlife hospital in Edmonton, we'll do a lead test. So we actually have a machine they can test for lead content in blood. So we'll take that and test it. And then there's, I guess it's sort of layman's terms, a bit of a reversant that you can give that helps them deal with that, helps them to sort of, but even with the application of the proper materials to help mitigate the effects of lead poisoning, recovery, especially if they have lots of lead in them, is fairly low. And these animals suffer quite a lot, in the end, and few are able to recover. But we've had some great success in the past. We've had animals with us for weeks and weeks recovering from lead poisoning, and some is to no avail, but others were successful. So it's kind of, again, a long process and not a very nice one for the animals. Yeah. You have had some big successes, though. My whole family was watching that porcupine story.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to tell people what happened with the two porcupines? Yeah,
so we've had a couple of really interesting stories. So the porcupine, a number of weeks ago, I was called out on a rescue. A porcupine had been attacked by a dog, and was big ornery porcupine, and had several puncture wounds on it. And we took it in and cleaned it up and gave it some antibiotics and stitched it together, and it was recovering really well at our animal hospital. Shortly thereafter, we received an adult but much smaller porcupine that was having some serious issues. It was lethargic, I was kind of listless, down and out, and after thorough examination, we came to the conclusion that the only way to save that porcupine would be to give it a blood transfusion, which of course is just unheard of, with porcupines. Well, as luck would have it, all the stars aligned, and we had this other big porcupine who is almost fully recovered, who is healthy. And so it dawned on us, hey, has this ever been done before? We started doing our research, and to our knowledge, a porcupine blood transfusion had never been done. So that was a pretty sort of amazing conclusion to come to something that was a possibility, And so we reached out to a very, very good veterinarian, Darren Mandrusiak. He's from Harvest Point Veterinary Clinic, happens to be one of the directors on our board of directors. And he had a blood specialist on his staff. And so they took up this project and they took them in. And of course, they're researching, are there porcupine blood types? There was no research in this sort of thing. So there was, without getting into it too much, because it's a bit of a complicated process, they would spin the blood and they combine the blood together. And anyway, they managed to extract blood from the larger porcupine enough to give a proper blood transfusion to the smaller one. Little or no risk to the big one. The little one also pulled through. We've released both porcupines and done really, really well. So just an amazing story, never been done before, and really the big porcupine is a hero in the story, able to save the little one. So pretty cool. But it doesn't end there. A few years ago, we talked about really cool things. We're talking about eagles. We had an eagle come in with a broken wing. And so, as is typical, we would bind the wing and hope that bone would recalcify, and so that it could hopefully fly and live a good life in the wild. The bone would not calcify, so we ended up putting a pin in it to see if that would work, and the bone still would not form. So Kelty Couture, who's our veterinarian, our sort of on-site veterinarian, who happens to be an avian specialist, actually took a bone graft from the keel of the eagle and took that and put that living bone to the wing joint. The growth happened there, the wing healed properly, and we were able to release the bird. So some pretty cool stuff happening at WildNorth to save wildlife.
So as someone that never gets trusted to be in charge of a budget, all of the vets and those staff, how are they all paid? Like, is your funding mostly through like grants, or is it mostly donations, or how does that work?
Yeah, so WildNorth is a registered charity, and the majority of our income does come through private and corporate grants or donations. So about half and half, actually, if we kind of look the breakdown, about half of it through public donation and about half of it through grants. The grants are always a bit of a crapshoot. You do your best to apply for them, and you get them or you don't. We have a small amount of sustainable funding from the city of Edmonton, from the city of St. Albert. There's a few places that give us money that we know is going to come in. We have a realistic idea that there's going to be a reasonable amount of donations to come in, but the grants are sort of the outlier. So as a small charity, like any other small charity, we have to work really hard to try to secure those grants. And it's hard though, because there's not big budgets here. There's only 10 of us, 10 full-time staff at WildNorth. We're chiefly a volunteer-run organization. And so for the very first time ever, we will be we actually am interviewing this week. We just put a call out for a small grant writer, and it's because it's difficult with a small charity. You're often in a position where all your resources are going to do your function or to fulfill your mission, and you don't have the extra money to hire a fundraiser who can then make you more money. And we've been very fortunate. We've had a reasonable couple of years, and we've been able to develop a very small nest egg, and so we're taking a chance. So we're going to be bringing on a fundraiser to see if they can generate us some more income. So we're hoping that they can help us with some of that sustainable funding that we're missing.
So you said that you're the largest the largest wildlife rehabilitation center for Northern Alberta.
In all of Alberta.
In all of Alberta. Why are there not more like northern and rural municipalities that are also contributing? Is there a particular reason, or are they just not aware of how much you do for them?
Yeah, so if we look at, from a statistical standpoint, about 65 or 70% of our animal intakes come from Edmonton area. And so some of the surrounding municipalities do contribute, like St. Albert gives us an annual contribution. Other municipalities that are surrounding will do on a case-by-case basis. So if we apply for a grant, they will often contribute, because they realize in WildNorth, because we hold this licensing, a lot of people don't realize that you can't interfere or do work yourself, even municipal employees. There's things like the Migratory Birds Conventions Act and other legislation that prevents people from actually handling and dealing with wildlife. So the service we provide is really essential. If we didn't do it in some of these municipalities, there'd be no recourse. There'd be no way for them to deal with these animals, right?
It would literally be illegal for them to help the animal.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's making these municipalities aware. But when we get into the northern municipalities, we may take a handful, maybe 2 or 3 animals from there, and 2 or 3 animals from here, and and at the end of the day, that's 3,500 animals. Again, some of them have grants, like Parkland County routinely gives us a grant that we apply for every year. We kind of give them a nickel rundown of how many animals we've helped in their municipality over the last year. They say, okay, well, this is something that we can't do on our own, so here's some fun. So we're working towards it. The municipal funding is, we see in the future that being, again, that really important sustainable funding. So we're going after them. We're doing our best, and hopefully, I think most of them realize how important what we do, the work that we do, not only for wildlife, but also for their public, who, again, you find an injured animal in your front lawn, what do, right? You need somebody to come help it. So we're getting there.
I think one of the first times I met you, you were explaining how you got 2 new kayaks just by asking nicely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Sometimes it's just reaching out. There's a lot of people still don't know we even exist, right? And I mean, if you were to find an injured animal and you didn't know what to do with it because you didn't know it exists, and you called the police or you called Fish and Wildlife or the fire department or your local veterinary clinic, eventually that animal makes it to WildNorth.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know we're there and the work that we do. So really, it's just getting the word out there. Last year, we hired a dedicated social media manager, and we've sort of exploded on social media that way. It's been really, really good for us, and really getting our word out there on different platforms, and sort of this is out of my expertise, out of my sphere. You ask me something about animals, I can help you out. Ask me something about social media, that's not my thing.
Whoever's doing that is doing a great job.
Yeah, Jill Vanderveen is our new manager there, and she's been just amazing. And we started just a couple of years ago. We were the first rehabilitator in the province to get on platforms like TikTok, for example, and because there's a demographic they were missing out on, right? So most of the financial contributors in terms of donations tend to be an older demographic, sort of bird watching community, people who are out and who have some disposable income. But through platforms like TikTok and others, and reaching out to a lot of young people who are really passionate about wildlife, they don't have that kind of disposable income, but a lot of people donating $5 a month or $10 a month. You get a lot of people, and that really adds up and helps us do what we need to do. So it's been really good.
I do like the way you set up the fundraising on there, because usually I'll do like a donation for my wife every Christmas in her name because we both like that stuff, but also how you have the different buttons where it's like adopt a bird of prey, adopt a beaver, so that way you can like even if the money does not directly go to a beaver, like it's nice to be like, hey uncle this, or hey cousin or something, I helped a beaver on your behalf. Like it feels good for both people.
Absolutely, and there's some cool perks in some cases. So our manager of business expansion, a wonderful woman named Jade Murphy, developed our animal adoption program. She's still with us and doing a great job. And if you adopt a raptor, for example, you get invited to a raptor release. You actually get to come and see the fruits of your contributions, and you get to watch a hawk or a falcon or an eagle fly free. And let me tell you, that is hands down the most exciting and favorite part of all the staff that work there when we get to participate in these releases. And it's just an amazing thing to see an animal return to the wild where it belongs.
My wife and I, we were out there in St. Albert for the long-eared owl release.
Okay.
That was my first time actually seeing a long-eared owl, and the first time I can recall ever seeing a long-eared owl in person.
Right.
And they're amazing looking. And
very cool birds.
And there was a pretty good crowd there too. Like a lot of people want to see that stuff, because as someone who's been stuck in the city for a long time, I still try and get out like into the woods for camping as much as I can, but just having that, again, direct connection with nature, like, oh, hey, look, here is an animal my money went directly to. It really reinforces that positive feeling. And whoever's idea it was to have the raptor releases, good on them, because that was
genius, right? It's just a win-win, right? It encourages people to contribute, helps the birds, and gives people an experience that they never forget. And you know what? You become more interested in saving things that you love and care about. And when you have firsthand experiences like that, then those are things that you remember, and you can continue to support wildlife. It's multi-generational. You see a bird released to the wild, and it makes a real emotional impact on you, and you're going to convey that, and your kids and your kids' kids and everybody else are going to have an appreciation. And it's just sustainable and helps lots of wildlife in the long run.
And that's why I loved doing the park ranger presentations at the schools, because there are a lot of kids, especially, I will mention a couple schools directly, but there was St. Thomas Aquinas School in way south Edmonton, and there was the Nebula Academy in northeast Edmonton, which has like a lot of first generation students, like their families just got to Canada very recently.
Right.
So there are people who have no connection with Canadian nature whatsoever because they just got there, and suddenly you've got a guy in a uniform saying, "Hi, I'm Gareth. Here's why you should care about nature. Here are the things it can do for you. Here are the things you can do for it." And I want to try and get that message message out to as many young people as possible, because then they can grow up to care about it. And then suddenly we're going to have more people that want to work in wildlife rehab, or want to be park rangers, or want to study biology, because I think every single sector of the economy needs more people right now. But as someone that really cares about nature, I think we should get the best ones.
Right. Well, and you hit the nail on the head. It's the young people that's important to reach. So I used to own the largest wildlife rescue and sanctuary in Ontario for many years. It was called the Muskoka Wildlife Center, and we actually had the largest live animal outreach program in the country. So my organization traveled to 1,300 schools every year, teaching children about animals. And the animals that we had were all non-releasable. So these were sort of ex-pets and confiscated animals and these kinds of things. And their message to children was, what does not make an appropriate pet and why, and also to help develop an appreciation for wildlife. And exactly to your point, when we're dealing with kids in Toronto, and especially in very multicultural areas, we bring animals out and, say we'd bring out a big snake, and at the end of the presentation, we'd hold on to the snake and we'd allow the kids to pass by, that each get an opportunity to run their hand along the snake to see what it feels like. And we've got children that are from, African countries, or they're from, Southeast Asian countries, who historically have been surrounded by a lot of venomous snakes. And so it's ingrained in their parents are not big fans of snakes. They're kind of frightened. They've passed that on to their children. Yeah. And so these children, you can see in their face, are very apprehensive, but we kind of talk about the wildlife we have in Canada. There's nothing to worry about. And we have cured, I'm going to say, hundreds of thousands of snake phobics, or people who are afraid of snakes, just through that kind of program, right? And the people remember. I'll never forget, I was doing some film work with animals up in Alaska. And I'm at the Anchorage airport, and I'm in the airport, and I walk into the bathroom, and this guy comes in to the bathroom. I'm washing my hands, and he's washing his hands in the sink beside me, and he turns over and he looks at me and he says, "Hey, you're the wildlife guy. I was in Anchorage, Alaska, right?" And I said, "What?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "When I was a kid, like 20 years ago, you came to my school with," and he named the animal. He didn't remember my name, but he remembered the name of all the animals that we brought in. There was like the dandelion, there was a little lion cub, and Julius Squeezer, this big Burmese python we brought in.
Who named that?
That was us.
Yes.
Lady Godiver. We had a peregrine falcon. So these fun names, memorable names. Anyway, he remembered the names of all these animals. He ended up going to school and becoming a wildlife biologist.
No way.
And saw me, and he remembers. He said his first inspiration for working with animals was this single presentation where he got a hands-on experience with these animals. So there's no question that when you're there physically talking with kids, and it can be impactful, or you see a wildlife release or any of these things, really important to contributing to the future welfare of wildlife.
Yeah, like I grew up doing some scout stuff, and I had at least one or two different camps where I would actually stay at the Valley Zoo. And yeah, just formative things like that, where you get to see like an armadillo in person, and you're like, that's such a weird animal, but it's cool that it exists.
Yep.
It's like there are memories from that age that will stick with me until I die.
And that's sort of the justification for a lot of the stuff that we do. A lot of people in this modern society have, and we don't get it because we could do a whole program on this, but a lot of people have concerns about zoos and animals in captivity and things like this. And yes, there are a number of very poor zoos that don't do things properly. There are some zoos, accredited facilities, that manage animals very well in a healthy way. But having firsthand experiences with animals is very different than seeing them on film. And when you have those experiences, that really does inspire a love for creatures. And so done properly and managed properly and ethically, and having animals in captivity, we have one animal ambassador ourselves. We have so last year a very kind woman found a pair of ravens, one of which was deceased, baby ravens, and she took in the living one and nursed it back to health. Didn't know about WildNorth, to that point we were talking about earlier. Kept it for several weeks, found out about us, turned it over to WildNorth, and she had totally imprinted this raven. So this raven quite literally thought it was a person. Yeah. And when we mixed it in with three other babies that had never had that kind of experience, you'd walk into the enclosure and the other three babies would go away from you. This one would run out you, mouth agape, bashing into your leg, screaming for food, right? Yeah. And it was toy. So despite our best efforts to rewild this bird, to get it back where it belongs, we are unable to. And so with permission of Alberta Environment Parks, it's now our newest education ambassador. So I was at the River Cree Casino just yesterday doing a presentation with a raven And the indigenous community, of course, the raven is a very significant animal in their animal totem and everything. And I mean, you should have. I mean, we had a captive audience like you wouldn't believe, and I can guarantee you an experience that people there will never forget, being that close to a raven and learning about ravens, right? So there's no question in my mind, things like that make incredible impact.
We so like I also love ravens. I'm probably going to get a couple of raven tattoos later in my life. But are you familiar with like the Norse mythology? Hugin and
of course. Yeah, you thought in memory. Yeah,
so we were coming back from where were we? It was I'm forgetting the name of the falls now, but there are a set of waterfalls right by Jasper. I think it was Athabasca Falls. And as we got back to the truck, there were these two ravens on top, and like right on top of the truck. And I just had a conversation with them for a while, and was getting all the footage of them because they were just, I mean, like realistically, they were probably waiting for me to drop some food. But for me, it was a really cool experience. I'm like, oh, look at them, like Hugin and Moon, and just waiting for us.
So I'll tell you, it's a very brief story because it's kind of a fun one. Back in Ontario at WildNorth, we had an injured raven with one wing that became a permanent resident at our wildlife center. Mm-hmm. And then shortly thereafter, we named him Nevermore. And then shortly thereafter, we received another raven that was confiscated at someone's house. It was kept in a parrot cage. No. And it was completely featherless, stress-related issues. It had plucked its feather, much like a parrot, right? Assisting birds will do that quite often. Yeah. And anyway, we named that one Edgar. And we mixed Edgar in with Nevermore. And within a few weeks, all those feathers started to come back in because, this was more comfortable, felt more, better socialization with the other bird, and the stress levels were going down. Anyway, we had the bird for some time, and all of a sudden, after a few weeks, we started to hear some amazing vocalization from this bird. We started to hear it go, we're like, what the heck is this? So we talked to the constable who was part of this raid where they had confiscated this bird, and he said, yeah, the guy was a video game addict, and the bird's shooting lasers at you. Right?
Oh my God.
So anyway, all the wild ravens would land on this enclosure to socialize with our captive pair, and pretty soon we'd be driving our vehicles around the park feeding the other animals, and the wild ravens were landing in the trees next to us going, shooting lasers at us as we kind of went around the park, Yeah. And so brilliant, these birds. They have different relationships with everyone. So they can actually talk like a parrot. They can learn to vocalize. And so whenever we come out of our front building and pass the enclosure, they would this Edgar would say, hello, hello. Well, my wife, my ex-wife now, my wife at the time, had a very special relationship with this bird. So everybody else would go, hello, hello. And whenever she'd walk by, he'd go, hello. Oh. He's his Barry White voice, you know, with her kind of thing. So just, I mean, absolutely brilliant birds, and we just love them. And again, like coyotes, much maligned, these corvids, right? So the crows and ravens and magpies.
The trash birds. Yeah.
And when we're talking about intelligence in mammals, the scientific community uses a metric that compares the size of your brain relative to your body mass. So by this standard, people are the most intelligent creatures. Even though dolphins have bigger brains because they have bigger mass, we're largely considered more intelligent because of the size of our brains. You know what the animal that has the largest brain compared to his body weight?
Is it the raven?
Magpie.
Oh, no way.
Right? And so, people are maligning these creatures. Well, so I don't know if we can use that same metric with birds or not, but it's just an interesting statistic. If you're going to use that metric for mammals, if you're going to use for birds, incredibly intelligent creatures.
I'm sure you've seen all those videos of crows and magpies like solving multi-step puzzles to get their food.
Yeah, and we have to keep our raven, Corby, it's a full-time job just keeping that bird with enrichment and keeping his brain working and all those gears, and because they're just so bright.
Why did you end up coming over to Alberta from the Muskoka Wildlife Center?
Yeah, so the Muskoka Wildlife Center was quite a fixture in Ontario. Not only did we work with the rehabilitation community and take in all these injured animals that couldn't survive and provide them with, we had a 100-acre space right in central Ontario, gorgeous large enclosures for animals to live out their lives comfortably. Yeah. We also were an invaluable source because we had the contracts with the Ministry of Natural Resources. Ontario has terrible legislation when it comes to keeping of exotic wildlife.
I've seen a lot of videos at the roadside zoos. It's crazy.
My Lord, it was just crazy. And so they, at one point, they estimated 100 roadside zoos in Ontario. And so our contract with them was to do the physical removals on their behalf when they would come in and find out that something was either illegally kept or it was dangerous or for whatever reason needed to be confiscated.
They were sending you in to get rid of tigers?
Yeah, I took tigers out of basements, and I took a hyena out of downtown Toronto, alligators out of bathtubs, venomous venomous snakes that have apartment buildings, all that crazy stuff. The stuff that you see, the stuff that like Tiger King stuff you see on TV, that stuff that's how it was operating in Ontario for many, many years. They still have issues with the legislation today.
I feel like we should do another separate episode just about all the roadside zoos.
I could tell you stories that would just make the hair in the back of your neck stand up. I mean, I've been chasing black jaguars at nighttime with a tranquilizer gun in the back of a pickup truck mowing down farm fences because it was that large and running. I mean, just
okay. You cannot skim over that. You cannot skim over that. How did you end up in that situation?
That was in my youth, actually. I was about, I was probably 21 years old, and I was working for an organization called Our Vanishing Kingdom in Lions Head, Ontario. And we got called to help out with this small backyard zoo. Jaguar had escaped 2 kilometers from a couple of schools. It was wintertime and it had just become dark, and this animal was at large. And the officers there are not really equipped. I mean, there are a lot of hunters there. They're equipped with dealing with bears, not really equipped with dealing with something that will try to kill you. As opposed to you hunting something. And and of course we had a facility to maintain it. So we were called, and my colleague was driving the truck, and I was in the back, and I hit the animal 3 times with the tranquilizer before it went down. We were right on its tail the whole time, and thought we overdosed the animal. I didn't have a rifle with me. I just had a tranquilizer gun. So I said, well, we got to bring it down, or it's going to hurt somebody. Yeah. And anyway, managed to get it down and bring it back to our facility and house it until the court proceedings went through, and they determined that they weren't to get this cat back, and then we placed it in an accredited zoo, where they had the resources to look after it properly. And so in Ontario, I did tons of this stuff at the Muskoka Wildlife Center. So it was a good resource for that. We were a major education enterprise. I mentioned we were traveling to all these schools teaching. We were a tourist attraction, so people can come on Highway 11 north of Toronto, and they wanted to learn about native wildlife, because the wildlife we kept on display, we had over 300 native wildlife, including things like wolverines and mountain lions and eagles, and right down to vultures to smaller birds and reptiles, every kind of species you can think of. But the Ontario government, in all its wisdom, the Transportation Ministry decided they needed to expand that tourist highway, and it was right in front of our center, right through our center.
Oh my God, seriously?
Right through our center. So in 2014, we were expropriated by the Ontario government, so we were bought out by the Ontario government. And then I had the big task of trying to find homes for all my creatures. And fortunately, because I had done so much work in confiscating animals and placing animals at these zoos, and sometimes rare creatures, I had a good network of leading heart colleagues that were willing to take in some of these, we're talking like one-winged eagles and one-eyed bobcats and, epileptic skunks and, these creatures, these sort of misfits that we provide homes for. Managed to place all of them at really nice facilities, and then had to shut down the park. And after that, I decided what I wanted to do, and I decided to move back to Edmonton. I'm a military brat, and my father retired here, so I have my parents and my siblings are here, and my oldest friends, and so I thought I'd come back to Edmonton and kind of figure out what I want to do from there. And this is where I bumped into Kim Blom from WildNorth, and we started talking, and she knew who I was from out in Ontario, and it was sort of kismet. It just kind of came together, and we've been doing it here ever since. Yeah,
right place at the right time,
for sure.
Did any of the animals you rehome end up at the Y Marsh?
I know Y Marsh well.
Yeah.
We've worked with them for many, many years. Possibly some of the reptiles and amphibians may have arrived there. I can't remember offhand for sure. I don't recall for sure, but we work with them hand in hand on a lot of things, and they did a great educational program there. Great, nice facility there at the Weimar. Are you familiar with Weimar?
I've only been there once. Yeah. In fact, when the show's done, I'm going to ask you for a couple of recommendations, because I'm going back to Ontario soon to visit family.
Oh, nice.
And I love going to all the wildlife rehab places and nature hotspots. Why aren't there more native animal zoos? Because when you mentioned that zoo full of 300 native animals, whenever I look at my bird book or my fish book or my Mammals of Alberta book, I'm like, I haven't seen any of these in person ever. Why is that not more of a thing? Is it because exotic animals draw more attention? Or?
Yeah, it's a shame, really. We had the second largest captive collector of native wildlife in the country. The largest one was a zoo in up about several hours north of Montreal in Quebec. Saint Félicien Sauvage, the Wild Zoo of Saint Félicien, they have the largest collection. We have the second largest collection. And you're right. Some of the large, more credited zoos, we're talking like the Calgary Zoo or the Toronto Zoo or some of these large institutions, have a smattering of sort of iconic Canadian species or North American species, but not many. And from my perspective, I agree with you. It's a shame, especially if you're visiting from another country and you're going to go to the local zoo. You're going to want to see the local wildlife, right? Yeah. The things that are here. But there's a reason why, wildlife charities and organizations use certain exotic, iconic animals to draw people, like the World Wildlife Fund using pandas and, things like this. And but it's interesting to see that because conversely, if we look at zoos in other parts of the world, there is a zoo in France that had them on loan from Canada, from a zoo here, a pair of striped skunks. And they said that they had lineups bigger to see the skunks than to see the pandas. Because, something that they're not used to seeing. They have this reputation and this chemical warfare aspect to them, and so...
They had their ambassador of Pepe Le Pew.
Right, yeah. So people, I don't know, I guess, local people here want to see animals from around the world, I guess. And I still, even though they probably get a lot of people visiting from other countries, I would suggest the lion's share of people that go to these large zoological institutions are local people from the country, right? So they're going to want to see things from elsewhere.
I just wish that we had a section of the zoo to explain that the thing you saw is not a gopher. The amount of people that say that's a gopher, that's a gopher, that's a gopher, and we only have one species of gopher in Alberta, I think, the pocket gopher. Yeah. And then like
the rest are ground squirrel.
10 different types of ground squirrel. It's... Oh my goodness!
But it's no different, and these are just colloquial terms that are used. I know Kim, who's still with us. She's now. I told you she was a founder of WildNorth. Is now our director of policy research. She hates it when people refer to gulls as seagulls, right? Oh, because there's ring-billed gulls and there's herring gulls and there's all these different kinds of gulls. And of course we're nowhere near the sea. But people they know them as seagulls, and that's just what they are. In the same vein.
I'm still trying to unlearn that. I occasionally make that mistake, and I'm like, no, it's a gull.
You're right. Yeah, it's just a gull. That's right. Yeah. Especially here in Edmonton, not like we're very close to the sea, right? I mean, I guess if you're somewhere on the West Coast, you said it was a seagull, I guess, well, you're sure.
Close enough.
Right.
Another thing that when I first met you, you shocked me by telling me that you were the lead animal trainer at Zaboomafoo, a show that I grew up with, like Kratz Creatures and Zaboomafoo.
Yeah.
Both things that were very important in my childhood. What was that like? What are lemurs like? What were the Kratt brothers like?
Yeah, that was great. So managing a big wildlife park, you had to be very creative when it came to generating revenue. Mm-hmm. Very expensive endeavor. And because I had all these animals in my education program that were handleable when they traveled to schools, eventually the film community started knocking on my door. And so I became the busiest animal trainer in film in Canada for a better part of 2 decades. And so I've been protecting some 300 productions over the years, including some really popular children's television series like Zaboomafoo. Yeah. Our main clients arguably were Animal Planet, National Geographic, Discovery Channel. But Zaboomafoo was amazing production. This was the largest animal production in Canadian history. I brought in 750 animals, 400 species from around the world over 2 seasons, so 65 episodes. We shot the first season in Toronto and the second one in Montreal, and took us 4 months at each location to do all the filming. And I actually met Martin and Chris Kratt, the host of the show. Great couple of guys. I met them during their previous show that they worked on, Kratz Creatures. And so they did an episode with me at Kratz Creatures, and I had these confiscated animals, and I think I handled a couple of tigers and some big snakes and some things with them. And anyway, they loved the episode, and they said it was their favorite episode they had ever shot. We had a wonderful time with these 2 guys. And so when they launched Zaboomafoo, and they were looking for someone to do all the animal handling and the coordination and all that kind of stuff, they naturally came to talk to me because they had this great experience from their previous show. Yeah. And I was in competition with a couple of other handlers, and but at this point I confiscated so many animals, hundreds of different species. And so during the interview process, I brought a binder with me showing myself and my staff just with every animal imaginable, things from everything from giant anteaters to creatures you've never heard of before, like kinkajous and patagonian cavies and binturongs and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And they were
remember the binturong.
You remember that?
Oh my god!
And they looked at the picture. They said, "Oh my, so you have access to this stuff?" I said, "Yeah, these are all animals we placed elsewhere." So I can pick up phone and call someone from the Jacksonville Zoo and say, "Hey, would you mind bringing Kilroy the anteater back up for production in Toronto?" Because we donated him, they were like, "Oh, sure, we'll bring him up."
Yeah.
So we had access like no other handler, maybe in North America, because of our relationship with all the zoos and the animals we had. So for them, it was an easy decision. We had a great time, and the one thing that I really loved about that particular production was we were right at the formative stages of everything that had to do with that production. So they would come to us and say, "Dale, what kind of animals do we have access to?" And I'd say, "Okay, well, here's some amazing creatures I can get." And then they'd say, "Okay, what kind of behaviors can we expect to elicit from those animals?" And I'd say, "Well, this is the things that they naturally do, or that we can encourage them through positive reinforcement. We can do all these things." And then we would write the scripts around the behaviors of the animals,
okay.
rather than a typical production that would have a script and say, "Hey, I want to hire a handler that can bring an animal to do this." We work together with them to do it. And also the nature of the production was that while we were having fun and we were doing this with the animals, if the animals did something that was really fun and exciting, we would just go with it. And so I would turn to the brothers, I'd be on set and say, "Oh, no, go with that. This is what they're doing. They're doing something amazing," and then they would kind of ad-lib and do something really fun. And so in this way, we got incredible stuff that you would never get any other way. And I'll give you a fun story with that. We brought in from a sanctuary a Japanese snow macaque. And if you ever watch documentaries on snow macaques, they're notorious for sitting in hot springs.
Yep, the most chill monkeys I've ever seen.
Right? They're like almost zen, right? They sit in that the hot springs there. And so they wanted to kind of show this. So in Animal Junction, this fictitious landscape where animals would all congregate to, where they would discover all these amazing creatures, they had a hot tub, and they wanted this snow macaque to sit in the hot tub, kind of like the hot springs.
Yeah.
And at any rate, so I brought the person in with the macaque. We had an offstage area where we spent a day or two with them, making sure that we had those behaviors sort of hammered down before we brought them to set and before the camera started rolling. And I would just throw in a raisin into the hot tub, and 100% of the time, this guy who would jump into the hot tub, we'd swim down, grab the raisin, he would sit in the hot tub. And so this was the shot that they wanted. It was amazing. But on the day, on set, the hot tub was there. The macaque jumped on the edge of the hot tub and started going around the hot tub. I threw the raisin in the hot tub, and there was a camera, and there was some other things. There was just no way he was going inside that hot tub. And in the show, Zabu, or Zabumafu, is a Sofaka lemur, and part of the time, of course, it's a puppet. And so the puppeteer was nearby with the puppet, and they're kind of watching on as these two brothers were interacting with the snow macaque who wouldn't go in the hot tub. So I kept seeing the macaque looking over his shoulder and looking at this puppet, right? This baby macaque. And he kept looking at it. So I whispered to Gord, who is the puppeteer. I said, "Gord, go closer to the hot tub. Go closer to the hot tub." And Gord said, "What?" I said, just go closer. And so he approached the hot tub about 10 feet of the hot tub. The macaque jumped from the hot tub, latched onto the puppet, and started hugging it as if the puppet was like a mother macaque.
Oh my God.
And then, of course, Gord, who was an amazing puppeteer, ad-libbed and started dancing around with this macaque just hanging on him and doing stuff. And of course, they ad-libbed this whole thing and how much they preferred, and it was just the most amazing sequence, something that was totally unexpected, but we rolled with the punches and turned out to be an awesome episode. So there's a really great example of how things go.
I need to go back and rewatch some of that show. I hope they must have a box set for that show. Like
they do, and they've gone on to other shows, and I've done work with those guys for years following that. They did a production after that called Be the Creature. I did a lot of which has also has a live animal component to it. I did a lot of handling for them, and I actually spent 2 seasons with them doing stage productions at Dolly Parton's theme park in Dollywood in near Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And I had a zebra down there, and a beaver, and a porcupine, some snakes, and some lemurs. And I did stage productions with them, teaching people in Tennessee about all these animals, and for 2 seasons, which was a lot of fun.
Is that almost like a Vegas residency, like similar idea?
Kind of, yeah. They're there 4 months for the summertime, 2 years in a row, and it was very cool.
That is neat. You've done a lot of wild stuff.
It's never boring, that's for sure.
Canada's Next Top Model?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience too. Yeah, we brought that was a little bit. There's a little bit of subterfuge on the way of the producers there as it pertained to the models. In other words, the models didn't know they were going to be doing a shoot with animals. We didn't realize this, and they asked us to bring some very specific animals. I think I had a black wolf there, and a bobcat, and a vulture, and some snakes. And these ladies, there was a couple of them that were not a big fan of snakes, right? And they had to get over their inhibitions to get over their issues with snakes. And I guess the idea was, as a model, you're often asked to do things out of your comfort zone or things you're not accustomed to doing. And so we actually had to pose with these reptiles and things. And that was probably the biggest hurdle that some of these ladies had to overcome. But so yeah, that was quite an interesting thing. I did a deodorant commercial with Bear Grylls with a pair of Wolverines. I did just some crazy stuff. And I could wax poetically about the film work. And I was unique in that most people who did film work did it strictly as a business. I did film work to raise money to rescue animals. So my angle was a little different than what some of the producers were accustomed to. And so when they would ask me to come on board, I would present them with something that said, okay, you have to sign this, and this gives me carte blanche to remove the animal from any situation that I think is inappropriate. I want to have the SPCA on set, which in Canada at the time was just never happened. And I said, I want to have it. I said I had to convince them that it was to their benefit, so they could show that no animals were harmed and that they had people thing. And so it was a bit of a at the time in the United States, having U.S. Humane was law. You had to have that on a movie set, but not in Canada. You didn't have to have any kind of thing. And so I would insist that it was here, and I would insist that if asked to do something or the animal wasn't behaving the way I could just pull it from and the shoot's over. Yeah. And they were very apprehensive right at first to do this stuff, but I had this access to animals they couldn't get elsewhere. And so as the years went on, this became very standard practice. So our organization was one of the pioneers in sort of ensuring that animal work in Canada was done very humanely and properly and supervised well, and to make sure that the animals' best interests were really looked after.
Have you ever had any situations where the animals were really misbehaving?
Yeah, and often it's not necessarily. So I'll tell you another Zabufu story. So we had brought on a big, like 200-pound black jaguar, and his name was Bagheera. And I had raised Bagheera.
Jungle Book reference.
Yeah, right. And Bagheera I had raised as a tiny baby. As it got older, I donated it to an accredited zoo. And when they were looking for a jaguar, I asked the zoo to bring it in, and I handled the animal on set. And but when you're dealing with dangerous animals like that on set, there's some it's very strict. So on the set, I said that you have to have essential personnel only. So in other words, just the camera guy and the brothers and my handler. So nobody else is on set. It's a closed set. It's completely sealed off, so the animal can't leave the set. And I had some very specific instructions. So Martin and Chris, who are a couple of really enigmatic young guys at the time, really lots of high energy, right? And they get involved in stuff. I said, okay, guys, I know you really like to interact with animals, but this is a 200-pound jaguar. I need you guys to stay together. Like, you can move around. Let's start by keeping that energy a little low key. We'll move around. We're gonna get the ball. We had a tub, a big pool. We're gonna get the jaguar to swim in the pool. We're gonna throw some balls in there. We're gonna have some fun. But guys, stick together. And so I had a handler that stood right beside the two guys, and he was like 2 feet left of camera, so you can see the handler when the camera's falling around. And I stood near the jaguar the whole time. I was like 2 feet from the jaguar. So every shot of the jaguar, I was right there beside, but you didn't know because they kind of cut me out of the shot. Yeah. So anyway, we were there for a couple hours, and it was going famously. Everything was awesome. Right? And then the guys getting very excited because things are going so well. All of a sudden, they split and they start running in opposite directions. Well, the jaguar keys on Chris, as the younger brother, and sees him running and leaps through the air towards Chris, and I leap through it because I'm right beside the jaguar, and I grab the jaguar around the waist and I tackle him to the ground, and I'm lying on top of the jaguar, and the cameraman, mouth agape, he goes white, and the camera kind of goes down, and it's silent, you can't hear a word, and I realize that people are terrified, and so I grab the paw of the jaguar on the bottom of its foot, I kind of zerberate, you silly jaguar, kind of lighten up the situation, right? And they're okay with it, and so I said, guys, you need to like stick together. For the rest of the shoot, they were like glue, right? They're right together. We kept it low key, and then it went really well. 10 years later, we're in Dollywood, Tennessee, And Chris comes up to me and says, "Remember all those years ago, you had a, I mean to ask you this for a decade, you had that black Jaguar and it came after me." I said, "Oh yeah," I remember it well. He said, would he have hurt me? I said, "Oh yeah, he probably would have killed you." He was, "Oh my God." I said, "But I didn't want to tell you that because we were shooting the shoot and he wasn't doing it maliciously, but you were small and fast moving and your cat brings you home birds and mice. Imagine what a 200-pound Jaguar would bring you home, right?" That's what kind of thing, right?
Definitely would have killed the mood for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, right. So there are, wild creatures and you can't always, and we knew there was a possibility if they had separated and someone was moving, we anticipated that. But it's tough when you're dealing with creatures like that. They're not their domestic counterparts. They're not dogs and cats, and even those animals, even children, can act sometimes in a way that you don't expect, right?
Yeah. And that is a really good segue into the next topic, because you and I both know wild animals are not like domestic animals. They're very, very different. But a lot of people still want to own wild animals. Do you think Tiger King was a net positive or a net negative for wildlife conservation? That's
a difficult question. I never met the Tiger King himself, but I did meet Carol. I not met her. I talked to her on the phone. And at a time when I was confiscating a lot of creatures, and we were getting a lot of big cats, we would look for temporary residences for these cats until things could go through, as we were running out of room in our facilities. So I was calling sanctuaries all over the continent and had a conversation with Carol. I never went down to her place. We never placed anything there, but I had that conversation just to kind of feel out the situation and see if that was a place that would be appropriate. And I never send anything to a place I haven't been to physically to kind of check it out and make sure it was fine. That was a very sensationalistic show. But as I alluded to before, that was the world that I lived in. His behavior and his eccentricities and the things that were going on during that show were very normal to me and the characters that I dealt with. He is not unique in the industry. I mean, the people who are exotic and they're wearing cat print all the time, they're very flamboyant, and these are the kind of characters that own lions and tigers, and their attitudes towards them are the people I dealt with very similar to that. And the characters in that film that you met along the way, I had met most of them, most of the professionals in the zoos and things over the years for various reasons, right? And I think that whenever we, to your question, whenever we make it look really positive or fun to own animals, that can be dangerous. But at least to the credit of that documentary, they talked about some horrific things that were happening in that industry and how, young cats being put down and killed and buried and some really terrible stuff. And so my hope is that it was a net negative, that people can sort of appreciate the eccentricities and watch it from entertainment value, but don't think it's a good idea to own a tiger on their own.
And it really opened my eyes to a lot of the crazy. Like I knew there were interesting characters, but after that show, I feel like the internet as a whole and like whatever my search algorithm was started showing more of the roadside zoo stuff. Yeah. And I was like, this is crazy. You even see the videos on YouTube all the time where it'll be like people going to those roadside zoos and the animals act like animals and the people freak out. And it's like, all right, was nobody debriefed? Did you not think the animal was going to stick its head through your open window? Did you not think the monkeys were going to open up your rooftop carrier and throw your stuff all around? Did you not think this out at all? Did the owners not think to tell you any of this?
Fortunately, a lot of those places, I mean, a lot of places are really hammering down. There are some places in the U.S., and Ontario arguably is the only province that still has major issues with this, but a lot of other places are really hammering down. So in Alberta, for example, we have the strongest legislation when it comes to keeping of exotic animals in the country. And so here you have to have a zoo license, and to have that, you have to meet some pretty strict criteria. You'd have to demonstrate that you had expertise, resources, appropriate exotic animal veterinary care. You'd have to be open to the public. There's lots of criteria that would be very difficult for most people to manage. That's why we don't have them. Most of the small menageries or backyard zoos in Alberta have been shut down, which is, I think, a wonderful thing. The other thing, just to touch base on, is when it comes to the film work, I'm really happy to see film going. A lot of film, when it comes to animals, are using CGI now, and that's putting a lot of animal handling stuff out of business, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. We approached animal handling for film from a very ethical standpoint, but that's not always the case in that industry. And so the same way that there are really great zoos that look after animals properly, and we have these smaller menageries that sometimes don't. And so I think in Alberta here, for example, one of the criteria for having a zoo license is you have to be accredited by the Canadian Zoo Association, which is major, really high bar to reach, right? To have enclosures a certain size and enrichment and, all of these things, right? So, I think we're heading the right way. I think people are justifiably critical of animals in captivity now and getting more so. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's some just reasons to have them when it comes to conservation projects and breeding programs and things like that, and some education work. But by and large, these small places disappearing is probably not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Colleen and I were speaking earlier about the domestication of foxes as well. That's something that happened fairly recently.
Very fast. Interesting studies in Russia on those guys and how quickly they can domesticate, right?
Yeah, but coyotes have never been successfully domesticated, which is kind of neat.
Interesting, yeah.
But I know when I was looking at the legislation for exotic pet ownership, there are special rules around certain wild cats, like servals. I know I've seen things where, like, people can have...
Bengal cats. Probably thinking?
It could be. There was something where the animal could be like a quarter serval. Yeah. There was some kind of rule there.
Yeah, so Bengal cats. So they have, Bengal cats, or you get domestic wildcat crosses, and they're like an F1 would be domestic and a wild together, their first offspring. F2 would be the second generation, and so on. It goes down. Mm-hmm. So depending where you are, some legislation covers ownership depending on how far removed they are from their wild counterpart. Likewise, some provinces completely outlaw the ownership of wolf-dog crosses, and some allow wolf-dog crosses because they don't consider them wolves. So it's by province, and so that makes it difficult. One year when I was in Ontario at the Muskoka Wildlife Centre, where wolf crosses are illegal, so they have poor legislation when it comes to exotic wildlife, but much tighter when it comes to native species in Ontario. I confiscated more than 60 wolf and wolf hybrids in 1 year in Ontario. So a rampant problem, people there. But here we don't have those same kind of problems in Alberta, for example.
And we've got the Amnuska Wolf Dog Sanctuary, which today's actually the 4-year anniversary of my wife and I visiting there.
Nice.
And yeah, that was very eye-opening to me because I, as someone that has owned dogs when I was young, I knew that wolves were obviously different, but I didn't realize how different they were until we went into the enclosure with the wolf dogs. And in my mind, I thought they'd be more aggressive, but it turned out they were way more shy.
Like submissive, yeah.
Yeah, like really wanted to avoid people.
But more unpredictable. Wolves are interesting creatures, and I'll give you an example. You may remember way back when there was a film, Dances with Wolves, with Kevin Costner. So Kevin Costner was a bit of a purist, and he wanted to make that film using a real wolf. And so there was a discussion amongst the animal handling community at the time about how silly that was, and we all tried to encourage the handler to use a wolf-dog hybrid.
Yeah.
And because this could be wolf-looking, but more trainable like a dog. And anyway, after all this advice, the handler went up and he told Kevin, he said, listen, we really suggest we do this. We don't use a real wolf. But he insisted. He said, no, this is like a purist thing. This has got to be a real wolf. At the end of the production, Kevin Costner was quoted saying that he will never use a real wolf again. I guess so much time was wasted in the production because the wolf wouldn't do what the heck it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it's night and day. Wolves and dogs, they share a similar lineage, but behaviorally they're very distinctly different. And in terms of how trainable they are and how much you can work with them, like night and day. And when you get a wolf-dog hybrid, you can sometimes get a very confused animal who has got that sort of wolf side of the brain telling him one thing and the domestic telling him the other thing, and which makes them very unpredictable. And statistically speaking, there are a relatively high rate of attacks on people from their pet wolf-dog crosses. When you consider how rare those are, they are much higher than any other sort of canine domesticated species when it comes to attacks per breed. So we might say that, let's say, for example, in this particular province that, a pit bull might rank as the number one animal that attacks people. Maybe it's followed by a Rottweiler. Number 3 might be a wolf-dog cross. But when you look at the number of animals, how this pet is not as disproportionate. So they're very, very unpredictable and never a good idea. Wolves are beautiful. A husky is beautiful. Get a husky. In my mind, huskies is they don't have that sort of people have these sort of romantic ideas about about wolves. And, people ask me all the time, I worked with like 3,000 species in my lifetime. People ask me what my favorite animals are, dogs and horses. They're domestic for a reason, right? And you can develop a relationship with those species that you can't with the other wild species. It's just not there. And you can appreciate them. They're beautiful. I love to work with them. But I don't want to have a tiger or a wolf in my home. Yeah.
I'm fully convinced dogs are at least a little bit psychic.
Yeah. Right. They have that.
They just know how to read you. They know how to make your day.
I just talk with my dog. I don't even, like my dog is so well trained, and it just sort of intuitively knows what I want when I gesture or talk, or they've just sort of learned to kind of go with the flow, and it knows exactly what I want. So honestly, and I'm a big horse guy too. I've had horses all my life, and horses and dogs to me are like I said, that's the reason why they're companion for so many people.
Yeah, if anyone needs to drop off an animal at WildNorth, he'll probably be greeted by his dog.
Yeah, Fable. Yes, she's our resident greeter. She is awesome, and she was actually a feral dog rescued from the Edmonton Humane Society, and within a few weeks, I had 30 or 40 trained behaviors on that dog. She'd never been in a house, had never seen stairs or carpet. Now you wouldn't believe how well trained this dog is, and I always thought it as a good example of just how good an adopted dog can be. Mm-hmm. And so people who are nervous about getting animals from a shelter because of behavioral issues or whatever, the time spent in is well worth it, and you can get amazing. That doesn't have to be a dog from a breeder. Shelters are amazing places to get dogs that can turn into amazing pets like Fable.
Yeah. To a certain extent, breed does matter, because if you're, for someone like me, if I were to pick up a German Shepherd, I would not be ready for that kind of dog, at least not yet, because that's a lot of work.
Yeah,
but
you got to know what you're doing. It's a working dog. You want, like, people, you'd be better off with a Great Dane in your house than you would with a Border Collie. Yeah. You think a Great Dane, a big dog, oh my God, but they're a laid back, kind of lazy dog, Border Collie's a working dog, right? It's got to be doing something. And if you don't keep it busy, it's going to get into trouble. And so, you're absolutely right. You have to kind of think about not just based on their looks, but based on, what is it you're after and what your lifestyle can accommodate.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place for us to wrap, actually. Thank you so much for coming on, Dale. Where can people find you? Where can people find WildNorth? Where can they send their donations?
So WildNorth can be found at wildnorth.ca. There is a donation link right on the webpage that you can follow. So if you're really passionate about wildlife and you want to contribute to their welfare when it comes to rescuing injured and orphaned animals and rehabilitating them, and here in Northern Alberta, we're the place to help. And again, we count on the community to help us, not only financially, but we work with the community to help rescue these animals. So if you want to get involved, drop us a line, and we'd welcome your assistance.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dale Kino.